The Duchy of Burgundy was one of the most influential feudal states in medieval and early modern Europe. Located in the northwestern part of historical Burgundy, this duchy was ruled by the powerful Dukes of Burgundy. Although it belonged to the Kingdom of France, the Duchy of Burgundy was distinct from the neighboring Free County of Burgundy, which is today's Franche-Comté. The first recognized Duke of Burgundy was Richard the Justiciar, who held the title in 918. Over the following centuries, the duchy passed through royal and noble hands. In 1004, Prince Henry of France inherited the Duchy of Burgundy, but he later transferred it to his younger brother Robert in 1032. Robert's descendants formed the Ducal House of Burgundy, a cadet branch of the French Capetian dynasty. Their rule defined the medieval identity of the region. When the male line of the Burgundian dukes ended with the death of Duke Philip I in 1361, the Duchy of Burgundy returned to the French crown. King John II of France then granted it to his son Philip, who became Philip the Bold. Through his marriage to Margaret III of Flanders, Philip united the duchy with vast northern territories, laying the foundations of a powerful Burgundian state. This expanded realm stretched from the Western Alps to the Low Countries, resembling the earlier Middle Frankish Kingdom of Lotharingia. The Duchy of Burgundy and its territories soon grew into one of the largest and most prosperous political powers of the late Middle Ages. Under the Valois Burgundy dynasty, it became a rival to both France and the Holy Roman Empire. However, its fortunes changed dramatically with the death of Charles the Bold in 1477 at the Battle of Nancy. With no male heir, the duchy itself was absorbed into the French crown by King Louis XI, while much of the Burgundian inheritance in the Low Countries passed to Charles's daughter Mary and eventually to the Habsburg dynasty. The story of the Duchy of Burgundy is one of ambition, dynastic power, and political rivalry. It shaped the balance of power in Europe during the Middle Ages and left a legacy that influenced both France and the wider continent for centuries. The Duchy of Burgundy was born out of the earlier kingdom of the Burgundians, a state created by an East Germanic tribe that settled in Gaul during the 5th century. The Burgundians established themselves in the region around Dijon, Chalon-sur-Saône, Macon, Autun, and Châtillon-sur-Seine, giving the area the name Burgundy. Their kingdom lasted until 534, when it was annexed by the Merovingian king Childebert I of the Franks after a decisive defeat. Yet, Burgundy often resurfaced as a political entity whenever Frankish lands were redivided among royal heirs. As part of the Frankish realm, Burgundy retained a semi-autonomous identity. The Burgundians preserved their own legal code, the Loi Gambette, even while under Frankish rule. The region, however, faced turmoil in the 8th century when Saracen raiders swept through southern Burgundy. Charles Martel eventually expelled them and divided the region into 4 commands: Arles Burgundy, Vienne Burgundy, Alemannic Burgundy, and Frankish Burgundy. His brother Childebrand was appointed governor of Frankish Burgundy. Under the Carolingians, separatist tendencies diminished, and Burgundy came to be used mainly as a geographical description for the old counties of the region. From these counties emerged both the County of Burgundy and the Duchy of Burgundy. Their rise was closely tied to the weakening of Carolingian central authority and the division of the empire after the Treaty of Verdun in 843. In this environment of shifting loyalties, Guerin of Provence supported Charles the Bald, the youngest son of Louis the Pious, in the Battle of Fontenay. As a reward, Charles granted him the administration of Chalon and Nevers, effectively making him a dux, a military leader and precursor to the title of duke. By the time of Richard the Justiciar, who died in 921, Burgundy was transforming into a powerful feudal domain. Originally Count of Autun in 880, Richard expanded his holdings across northwestern Burgundy, and by 918 he was formally recognized as Duke of Burgundy. His territories included Autun, Beaunois, Valois, Digerais, Auxois, and many others. As Duke, Richard consolidated his lands, imposed order, defended against Norman incursions, and even offered refuge to persecuted monks. This marked the true beginning of the Duchy of Burgundy as a distinct political entity. Richard's son, Rudolf, also known as Raoul, carried Burgundy's influence to new heights. In 921 he inherited his father's lands, and just 2 years later he became King of France. It was from his Burgundian power base that he secured the resources to fight rivals and maintain his crown. The duchy's fortunes shifted again under Hugh the Black, who ruled until 952. Burgundy found itself under pressure from its powerful neighbors, the Robertian family, who controlled the Duchy of Francia and sought to impose their authority over Burgundy. Their attempt failed, and Burgundy remained separate. Afterward, the duchy came under the rule of Otto and then Henry the Venerable, brothers of Hugh Capet, the first Capetian king of France. Their leadership preserved Burgundy's independence, but when Henry died without heirs, it marked a turning point in the history of the Duchy of Burgundy. The succession crisis of 1002 marked a decisive turning point in the history of the Duchy of Burgundy. When Duke Henry the Venerable died without direct heirs, two men put forward their claims. His nephew, Robert the Pious, King of France, and his adopted stepson, Otto William, Count of Macon and Count of Burgundy. Robert argued that, as both feudal overlord and closest blood relative, the Duchy of Burgundy was rightfully his. Otto William, however, refused to step aside, launching a bitter war with the support of his son-in-law, Landry, Count of Nevers. Had Otto William succeeded, the Duchy of Burgundy might have been united with the County of Burgundy, placing it firmly within the orbit of the Holy Roman Empire. That union could have shifted the balance of power in medieval Europe. Instead, after 13 years of war, Robert the Pious emerged victorious. He secured the duchy west of the Saône, including Dijon, ensuring that the Duchy of Burgundy would remain firmly tied to the French crown. At first, the duchy became part of the royal domain, but the Capetian kings, still struggling to consolidate power, lacked the resources to control such a turbulent region directly. In 1032, Robert the Pious granted the Duchy of Burgundy to his younger son, Robert I. The agreement made clear that Burgundy would be ruled by its dukes as a hereditary domain, owing allegiance only to the French crown. With that, the Capetian line of dukes began. Robert I inherited a duchy in disarray. Years of succession wars had left Burgundy weakened, its lands fragmented among unruly vassals. The dukes had given away much of their domain to secure loyalty, leaving them dependent on the obedience of nobles who often acted independently. Powerful figures such as the Abbot of Cluny, who claimed exemption from secular rule, and the Bishop of Langres, who was both a duke and a peer of France, further challenged ducal authority. Despite these obstacles, the Capetian dukes slowly rebuilt their power. They expanded their holdings through escheat, reclaiming lands when vassals died without heirs. They purchased territory and vassalage, steadily strengthening the ducal domain. They also turned feudal rights into revenue, granting recognition or privileges in exchange for payments, borrowing shrewdly from Jewish and Lombard bankers, and managing dues with care. Gradually, the Dukes of Burgundy established a stronger and more centralized authority. The duchy itself benefited from this steady rule. A court modeled on that of Paris developed around the dukes, while the Jours Généraux, echoing the Parliament of Paris, met at Beaune. The administration was reorganized into 5 bailiwicks, with ducal bailiffs overseeing local provosts and lords. Over time, Burgundy gained stability, order, and a more recognizable state structure. The Duchy of Burgundy also extended its influence beyond France. During the late 11th century, Burgundian dukes joined the Reconquista in Spain, marrying into Iberian royalty. Robert's daughter Constance wed King Alfonso VI of Leon and Castile, while his grandson Henry married Teresa of Leon, founding the Portuguese House of Burgundy. When the First Crusade began, Burgundian dukes turned their attention eastward. Odo I, Duke of Burgundy, died in the Crusade of 1101, showing how closely the duchy was tied to the great religious and military campaigns of the age. Under Robert II, who ruled from 1271 to 1306, the Duchy of Burgundy reached new levels of prosperity and strength. Determined to prevent the fragmentation of ducal lands, Robert II established the principle of inheritance by primogeniture. He decreed that his eldest son and heir, Hugh, would inherit the entirety of the duchy, while younger children would receive only annuities derived from their brothers' estates. This ensured that the Duchy of Burgundy would remain intact and powerful under the leadership of the reigning duke. By the end of the Capetian period, The Duchy of Burgundy had transformed from a fractured and unstable territory into a consolidated, influential principality. It had become a key player in France, in Spain, and even in the crusading movement that reshaped the medieval world. The death of Duke Rouvres in 1315 brought his brother, Odo IV, to power. Odo was no ordinary noble. Through his mother Agnes of France, he was a grandson of King Louis IX. His family ties stretched even further. He was brother-in-law to two French kings, Louis X and Philip VI, and son-in-law to another, Philip V, whose daughter Joan III of Burgundy and Artois he married. Unlike earlier ducal marriages that failed to expand Burgundian territory, Odo's marriage was a success. Joan was a sovereign countess, and through her the Duchy of Burgundy was reunited with the County of Burgundy and Artois. But this reunion would not last. The couple had only one surviving child, Philip, who married the heiress of Auvergne and Boulogne. They, too, produced only one heir, Philip of Rouvres. Tragedy struck in 1346 when the elder Philip was killed in a riding accident. His mother, Countess Joan III, died a year later, and in 1349 Odo IV also passed away. This left the survival of the Duchy of Burgundy resting on the frail shoulders of young Philip of Rouvres, a toddler of just 2.5. By inheritance, Philip became Duke of Burgundy in 1349. He had already been Count of Burgundy and Artois since the death of his grandmother 2 years earlier, though in practice his grandfather Odo had continued to rule. Now, under the regency of his mother Joan of Auvergne and her second husband, King John II of France, the Duchy of Burgundy and its associated counties were managed on his behalf. The young duke seemed destined for greatness. Through his mother he stood to inherit Auvergne and Boulogne, and his betrothal to Margaret of Dampierre, heiress of Flanders and Brabant, promised to bring some of Europe's wealthiest territories into the Burgundian fold. By 1361, at the age of 17, Philip of Rouvres appeared poised to transform the Duchy of Burgundy into one of the continent's most powerful states. Fate intervened. That same year Philip contracted the plague. Aware of his mortality, he made his will on November 11th. Just 10 days later, the last direct descendant of Duke Robert I was dead. His death brought an end to his dynasty and left the question of succession wide open. By his will, Philip of Rouvres had declared that his possessions should pass according to the laws and customs of each territory. This meant his many lands could not be inherited as a single block. Instead, they followed their own local rules of succession. Auvergne and Boulogne passed to Jean de Boulogne, a relative from his mother's line. The counties of Burgundy and Artois went to Margaret of France, grandmother of Philip's bride-to-be, Margaret of Dampierre. The Duchy of Burgundy itself was more complicated. Inheritance law recognized two principles: primogeniture, inheritance by the line of the eldest child, even through grandchildren, and proximity of blood, inheritance by the closest living relative. Both were accepted in Europe and both applied here. Philip's great-grandfather, Duke Robert II, had left 3 surviving lines of descent. His elder daughter Margaret, Queen of Navarre, left a grandson, Charles II of Navarre. His younger daughter Joan left 2 living sons, including John II of France. Charles had the better claim under primogeniture. John had the better claim under proximity of blood. On paper, the King of Navarre's claim may have looked stronger, but politics outweighed legal theory. Charles II of Navarre was allied with England during the 100 Years' War and widely distrusted in Burgundy. By contrast, John II of France and his son, the Dauphin, enjoyed Burgundian loyalty. Thus, when Philip of Rouvres died in 1361, the Duchy of Burgundy did not pass to Navarre but was reclaimed by the French crown. The duchy was granted to John II's youngest son, Philip the Bold, inaugurating the powerful Valois Burgundy dynasty that would dominate European politics for the next century. Furthermore, King John II did not stand alone in his claim to the Duchy of Burgundy. He was strongly supported by John of Boulogne and Margaret of France. John of Boulogne had long been a loyal ally of the French king, and this bond was reinforced by the marriage between John II and Joan of Boulogne, John's own niece. Margaret of France, meanwhile, carried immense influence. As the daughter of a former French king and one of the last senior members of the House of Capet, her loyalties were firmly rooted in France. Her support was especially significant because Charles II of Navarre had deeply offended her. He had laid claim to lands in Champagne that once formed part of her sister Joan of France's dowry during her marriage to Otto IV. These estates originally came from Joan I of Navarre, Countess of Champagne, the grandmother of both Margaret and Joan. Charles, as Joan I's senior heir by primogeniture, argued the lands should pass to him. But Margaret rejected this claim, seeing it as an attack on her family's rights. This triple alliance between John II, John of Boulogne, and Margaret of France effectively shut Charles II of Navarre out of the succession. In medieval politics, the backing of fellow heirs carried great weight. With two of the key claimants aligned against him, Charles II's position collapsed. The nobility of the Duchy of Burgundy soon followed suit. Faced with the united front of John II and his allies, they chose to recognize him as their new duke. John II had already mobilized troops in Nivernais in case force was needed, but resistance proved minimal. The Burgundian lords swore homage willingly, and aside from a handful of half-hearted uprisings in favor of Navarre, the duchy passed smoothly under John II's authority. With this decisive outcome, the Duchy of Burgundy entered a new phase under the direct control of the French crown, setting the stage for its eventual transfer to John's son, Philip the Bold, and the rise of the powerful Valois Burgundy dynasty. The legal implications of John II's accession to the Duchy of Burgundy are often misunderstood. A common misconception is that, upon the death of Philip of Rouvres, the Duchy of Burgundy, lying within France, therefore escheat to the French crown. This is simply not true. The duchy had been granted to the heirs of Robert I, and John II inherited not as King of France, but as the son of Joan of Burgundy and grandson of Robert II. Had it not been for the unique marriages of Robert II's descendants and the untimely death of Philip of Rouvres, John II would never have become duke at all. Another frequent claim that John's inheritance meant the duchy merged with the crown is trickier. Strictly speaking, no such merger occurred. However, John attempted to force the issue by issuing letters patent in which he declared that, having taken possession of the duchy through hereditary right, he immediately transferred it to the French crown to be inseparably united with it. If this act had stood, Burgundy would have ceased to exist as an independent duchy, its history broken, its ducal line extinguished. Centuries before the actual annexation of Brittany in 1532 set a real precedent. Yet John had misread the political landscape. The Burgundian nobility had already accepted him smoothly as duke. On December 28, 1361, they swore homage, and he left Count of Tancarville as his lieutenant. But at the same time, the Burgundian estates issued declarations of their own. The Duchy of Burgundy would remain a duchy, not a province. It would undergo no administrative changes. Its tie to France came only through the person of John, and it would never be annexed. The most emphatic statement was simple. There had been no annexation, nor would there ever be. Set against this united stance, John's decree of absorption was powerless. Lacking the will or ability to enforce his letters patent, he let them quietly lapse. Instead, he sought another solution, one that both honored his son and calmed Burgundian pride. That son was Philip the Bold, John's youngest but most renowned child. At just 14, Philip had stood with his father at the Battle of Poitiers in 1356, earning admiration for his bravery. To reward him and to reconcile the duchy, John named Philip governor of Burgundy in June 1363. The estates, who had resisted Tancarville, readily embraced Philip and granted him subsidies. On September 6, 1363, John secretly invested Philip as Duke of Burgundy, both in his capacity as king and as duke passing on his title. After John's death in April 1364, the succession was confirmed publicly. On June 2, 1364, King Charles V issued letters patent formally establishing Philip the Bold as the new Duke of Burgundy. With this act, the Valois Dukes were born, inaugurating one of the most powerful and dazzling chapters in the history of the Duchy of Burgundy. Under the Valois Dukes of Burgundy, the duchy entered its golden age. The marriage of Philip the Bold to Margaret of Dampierre, widow of Philip of Rouvres, was a masterstroke. It not only reunited the Duchy of Burgundy with the County of Burgundy and Artois, but also brought under Burgundian control the immensely wealthy counties of Flanders, Nevers, and Rethel. By the time of Philip and Margaret's deaths in 1404-05, their son John the Fearless inherited a composite realm that stretched from eastern France to the Low Countries, resembling less a French fief and more an independent European state. Philip the Bold had pursued a cautious and pragmatic policy. His son John the Fearless, r. 1404-1419, was far bolder, and under him the Burgundian dukes came into open conflict with the rival House of Orleans. The factional struggles culminated in John's orchestration of the assassination of Louis of Orleans in 1407, a crime that earned him power but also the lasting enmity of the French crown. From John's death onward, the Valois Dukes of Burgundy were regarded by Charles VII and later Louis XI not as loyal vassals, but as dangerous rivals. The last two ruling dukes, Philip the Good r. 1419-1467, and Charles the Bold r. 1467-1477, carried Burgundy to its greatest height. Philip the Good expanded Burgundian influence across the Low Countries, presiding over a glittering court at Dijon and Bruges. His son Charles the Bold dreamed of turning this collection of territories into a fully independent kingdom between France and the Holy Roman Empire. But his ambition overreached his resources. In 1477 Charles was killed at the Battle of Nancy, leaving only a daughter, Mary of Burgundy, and no male heir. Louis XI of France immediately declared the Duchy of Burgundy extinct as a fief and seized it into the royal domain. Mary, however, inherited her father's remaining possessions and claimed the ducal title. Her marriage to Archduke Maximilian of Austria, later Holy Roman Emperor, set off the War of the Burgundian Succession, 1477-1482. The conflict ended with the Treaty of Arras, 1482, in which Maximilian recognized the French annexation of the duchy and several other territories. France retained Burgundy proper, but the county of Flanders passed to Maximilian and Mary's descendants. Even this settlement was not final. With the Treaty of Senlis in 1493, Maximilian regained the county of Burgundy, Artois, and Charolais for the Habsburgs. Yet the Duchy of Burgundy itself, the ancestral heartland east of France, was lost to France forever. From then on, the title Duke of Burgundy survived only as a claim, while the duchy itself became part of the French crown lands. In 1526, Mary's grandson Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, briefly recovered the title and territory of Burgundy under the Treaty of Madrid, forced upon Francis I of France after the disaster at Pavia. Yet Francis repudiated the treaty almost as soon as he regained his freedom, and Charles never secured the duchy in practice. After Charles's abdication, his rival Henry II of France went further, declaring that the Spanish Habsburgs had no legitimate right to the Burgundian inheritance. From that point forward, Burgundy remained permanently integrated into the French crown lands. The title itself, however, was not forgotten. French monarchs occasionally revived it for their heirs. Louis XIV's grandson, Louis, Duke of Burgundy, and Louis XV's grandson, the ill-fated Louis Joseph, both bore it. Even beyond France, the legacy endured. The kings of Spain continued to style themselves Dukes of Burgundy, and the Cross of Burgundy, once a ducal emblem, became a symbol of the Spanish Empire at its height. Today, King Felipe VI of Spain still maintains the historic claim, a faint echo of the grandeur of a state that once stood between France and the Empire. If you enjoyed this journey through the dramatic rise and fall of the Duchy of Burgundy, don't forget to like this video to support the channel. Hit subscribe so you never miss our deep dives into history. And share your thoughts in the comments. Could Burgundy have truly become an independent kingdom? Or was it always destined to be pulled between France and the Empire?